Right, good morning everybody. My name's Keith Riley. I'm from Veolia, as you've heard. Let me get this right. Yep. Right, Veolia is quite a large corporation. Our global revenues are some nearly 35 billion euros, and we're employing about over 300,000 people around the world on 5 continents. And it's actually quite a clever sort of business plan, really, because if you look at the areas Veolia is in, that's water, waste management, energy services and transportation, it means there are actually over 1 billion people in the world that sometime during their day are actually touched by a Veolia service. And some of them are actually in it 24 hours a day, poor scientists. Anyway, so very large corporation. In the UK, we're actually the largest of the waste management companies. I come from the waste management side of the business. And in the UK here, we're turning over about £1.4 billion, and we're employing about 12,000 people altogether in actually doing that. But I don't want to talk particularly about Veolia. What I want to do this morning is really to try and set the scene for the other speakers during the course of the day. And when we talk about this area of activity, as Tom has already said, waste management, we move to resource management. Just about everything we do now is informed by 3 major bits of European legislation. So a lot of the thinking and the way certainly the UK has had to go along with the rest of Europe, and we've still got some of Europe trying to get there, is really through European legislation. And the latest of those has been what they call the revised Waste Framework Directive. And that's important because now, in the past, much of the legislation impacted the public sector. Now we start to see it really impacting the private sector as well, and how we start dealing with commercial industrial waste as well as our municipal waste. And I think that's quite significant. One of the bits of philosophy that's been there probably now for getting on for 20 years, it took a little bit longer, well, it wasn't quite as long ago as that it started to get into the minds of people in this country, but certainly where the European legislation's always come from, has been this concept of a waste management hierarchy. And, I think just about everybody now has got this general idea in their heads that it's better to reduce and recycle than it is to recover, and then it's better to recover than it is to dispose. But actually, the fact probably is that most people actually don't understand why. And if you go back a few years ago, you heard that recycling was all about just saving resources, saving material resources. And in fact, that isn't the case. Because actually, what it's really about nowadays is, and a lot of the thinking and how it's informed the practices that have come forward, is it's a carbon issue. And this diagram actually appears in the 2007 Waste Management Strategy for England and Wales, and it was actually drawn by David Miliband, and I actually have a copy of the original sketch that he made, because I happened to be in DEFRA the day that he did it. And if you understand it, can you please explain it to me afterwards? Because I don't. But the main thing is that we're talking about climate change impact and carbon whenever we start. That's really what's behind a lot of this thinking today. But there's also something else. So energy efficiency, carbon efficiency is one thing, but there's also the question of energy production and generation, because this is another issue that in fact is hitting the UK, but also the whole of Europe, in that there's an energy scarcity problem and ultimately a security problem. And of course, what we have in what has been called waste is a fuel resource which in fact can help address this issue, because whatever treatments, whether we're talking about thermal treatments or anaerobic digestion, whatever, You see, it can supply a base load. It's not intermittent. It doesn't depend on weather. Doesn't depend on whether the sun shines or the wind blows. And so it's a very secure form of energy generation. But something else has also came along. I mentioned about recycling. At first it was all about saving material resources. Well, actually, there are material resources that we do have to save, and we do have to be very conscious about. And so, if you like, we've got to focus on that. And David will be talking more about that later, so I won't go into the detail of it. But it's something that also, if you like, informs this whole space as we move forward. So when we put all of that together, in terms of conceptual thinking, what in fact we've had, if we go back around about 20 odd years ago, the whole thinking was about disposal. It was all about, you had this stuff, it was called waste, you didn't want to do anything with it, get rid of it as cheaply as possible, as easy as possible, and indeed quite efficiently in this country, which has made it difficult for us, because when we then start to try to add value, it becomes quite difficult. The waste management hierarchy came in, and we moved into what we call integrated waste management, and a lot of the big PFI contracts that have come to pass in this country are based on the principles of integrated waste management, where we try to get value from the waste stream, and we bring this concept of energy recovery into it. But now, I submit that we're actually moving into what we call resource management, which is in fact the whole mindset shifts into, you've got a material here that's got a resource, it's got a value, it's got value added. Start thinking about then what you do with it. And in fact, what you'll find if you think all of that through, you have a very different approach to the subject to what we had 20 years ago when we were in the business of waste disposal. What that kind of leads to then is a circular economy. So what we're trying to do is to recover stuff, we're trying to recover materials, we're trying to cover the energy base, and we're trying to do that so that we generate as little carbon as we possibly can get away with. So if you like, it's an energy balance issue, really. And what that starts to do is to open up all sorts of opportunities and opportunities for business. If we actually stand back and say, well, how do we express all of that? Because it's actually quite a complex thing if you try to write all that down into a consistent sort of underpinning philosophy. What's it really boil down to? Well, I'd say there's 4 pillars there. First of all, it's getting material out of landfill, because that's very greenhouse gas generative. Trying to increase this material recycling, because in fact it's very energy efficient to do that. To recover the energy when we can't actually recover the material as a material in some form. And to do everything minimising climate change impacts. And that really, sort of all of those 4 pillars actually inform modern waste management, which we now call resource management. So let's look at the market a little bit. Now, to look at the European market, I think is a little bit too complex, and it's very different, very varied. So what I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes on the UK situation, because we can then draw some points out of that. If you look at the market overall, what you're able to do is to actually segment it quite well. And we've had a strange situation in this country particularly, where there's been a big divide between public sector waste, municipal waste, the waste that we all produce in our homes, and the waste produced by business. And even waste produced by a local authority acting as a local authority actually is private sector waste, it's not public sector waste. So we've had quite a complex sort of setup within the whole area of waste management, and you find this has found its way into the regulation and indeed into the strategies. But if you stand back from that and segment the market, we get this sort of division. I won't go into all the detail of it. But what you're actually able to do then is to say, well, what's out there, what's being dealt with, how does it need to be dealt with, and what are the opportunities moving forward? The big thing, the big driver that I think just